I think a lot of people in Taiwan look at what happened to Hong Kong in the last few years and they worry that Taiwan might go the same way. In particular, that the Chinese government find ways of subverting democracy in these places. They find ways of breaking people's optimism, about remaining independent. And so little symbolic moments, whether it's a Japanese prime minister dropping a little hint that Japan cares about Taiwan and that might get involved, or whether it's the Taiwanese president, as you just said, having a plate of Japanese seafood and saying, let's all eat Japanese seafood. Let's all go on a visit to Japan now that the Chinese government has told its own people not to go there as tourists. These little moments, I think, really matter because they're part of this bigger war for public opinion that's going on in East Asia. I think as far as possible, the Japanese and the Taiwanese want to paint China as the playground bully of East Asia. And little moments like this, I think, contribute to that strategy.
Now, last week, the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, sent a defiant message to China by posting a picture of himself eating a plate of sushi. His celebration of Japanese food came after Japan's new prime minister, Sanae Takaichi, enraged Beijing by suggesting that any use of force by China against Taiwan would constitute a survival-threatening situation for her own country. China proceeded to take economic measures against Tokyo, including the banning the import of Japanese seafood. And Lai's lunch of yellowtail sushi and scallops was therefore a symbol of solidarity with Japan. Well, Dr. Christopher Harding is a senior lecturer in Asian history at the University of Edinburgh and has written in the Sunday Times about the relationships between these three countries and how food is used in those diplomatic relationships, and joins me now. Dr. Christopher Harding, hello.
Hello there.
Thank you for being with us. So look, why was China so angry about the claim that Chinese battleships around Taiwan would constitute a survival-threatening situation?
So I think the Chinese are well aware of Prime Minister Takaichi's position on Taiwan. She's been quite hawkish in the past. Her great mentor, Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister of Japan for a very long time, also famously said after he stopped being Prime Minister that a Taiwan emergency would be a Japan emergency. So the Chinese know all that, but there's this important rule that the Japanese follow, like the US also follow, which is you don't comment on what you might or might not do in the event of a Chinese attempt on Taiwan. You have what they call strategic ambiguity. And Takaichi has gone against that. And it's particularly important, I think, that she, this exchange that you mentioned, used that phrase, a survival-threatening situation. 10 years ago, Japan changed the approach under which it might deploy its self-defense forces to say not just if Japan itself were attacked, but if a close partner of Japan were attacked and Japan itself were existentially threatened, then it could deploy its self-defense forces. And for some, that was taken to mean a Chinese attempt on Taiwan. So that phrase, survival-threatening situation, I think is really important. And having raised that publicly, having stepped over that red line of talking about it in public rather than being ambiguous, has really upset the Chinese.
Do you think she regretted saying it? Was it a message that she intended to deliver?
It's a really good question. I think she seems in public now to slightly regret it. I think the Japanese are hoping for a way to walk this back. But on the other hand, because this situation around Taiwan is one where you cannot say much in public, even dropping hints, even finding small ways of expressing solidarity, the Japanese with the people of Taiwan, I think becomes quite important. I think a lot of people in Taiwan look at what happened to Hong Kong in the last few years and they worry that Taiwan might go the same way. In particular, that the Chinese government find ways of subverting democracy in these places. They find ways of breaking people's optimism, about remaining independent. And so little symbolic moments, whether it's a Japanese prime minister dropping a little hint that Japan cares about Taiwan and that might get involved, or whether it's the Taiwanese president, as you just said, having a plate of Japanese seafood and saying, let's all eat Japanese seafood. Let's all go on a visit to Japan now that the Chinese government has told its own people not to go there as tourists. These little moments, I think, really matter because they're part of this bigger war for public opinion that's going on in East Asia. I think as far as possible, the Japanese and the Taiwanese want to paint China as the playground bully of East Asia. And little moments like this, I think, contribute to that strategy.
How important is food here? So when China bans Japanese seafood, is that just a sort of like a bit of cultural posturing? Is that wreaking like significant economic damage on Japan? Well, what does it mean?
It's huge for Japan because China's the biggest market for Japanese seafood. And Japanese seafood, big industry, and it's struggled in the last 14 years after that disaster back in 2011, the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown. There are a lot of worries all around the world about the safety of Japanese seafood, and a kind of combination of health worries and politics has made life really difficult for that particular industry. And now the Chinese are making life even harder for them. So I think there is that going on. But there's also an attempt, I think, in China to push back against all sorts of Japanese economic and cultural influence there. So what they've also done, you've got the seafood, you've got the encouragement of Chinese tourists not to go to Japan now, and that's millions of people every year. You've also got an attempt to delay the release of Japanese films in China, which is economically important. China is obviously a huge cinema market, but also because Japanese films are a way of slightly pushing back against a narrative in Chinese schools and the Chinese film industry, which is very anti-Japanese, which harps on the events of the first half of the 20th century, the cruelty of the Japanese Imperial Army. So these soft power elements, I think, of Japan in China are crucial. And if the Chinese are turning that off or pushing back on it, I think that is important.
So finally, then, if you have like a senior Taiwanese politician making a show of eating Japanese seafood, what's that actually saying to China? It's not just defying the ban, is it? It's saying we identify with Japan as much as we identify with China, no matter the history. I mean, it's an insult, is it not?
I think it is. I think since Taiwan sort of transitioned to democracy in the late 80s and the early 1990s, they've often looked to Japan as being a model of an open, technologically advanced, successful modern Asian country. And Japan is often compared to China by Taiwanese, on that kind of basis. And so those two countries have had a closer and closer relationship, Japan and Taiwan, on that basis. And so this latest act of solidarity, I think the president is trying to say, we really have to stick together. We have the same values. We have the same shared interests. And that if we really continue to beef up our relationship, then that can be a deterrent towards China against doing what everyone expects in one way or another it's going to do, which is to make an attempt on Taiwan.
Really interesting. Thank you very much indeed. That is Dr. Christopher Harding, who's a senior lecturer in Asian history at the University of Edinburgh.